They built 96 luxury homes on my grandfather's land while he was dying, but they never expected the trap he'd set from his deathbed. The phone woke me at 4:38 a.m. "Jack, they're tearing up your grandfather's fields. Bulldozers everywhere." Ellen's voice cracked with panic. My grandfather's neighbor of 40 years never called, especially not before dawn. "What? Who's tearing what up?" "Oak Ridge Estates. They're building houses on your land. I tried to stop them, but they showed me papers. You need to come now." I threw clothes in a bag and sped toward the countryside, breaking every speed limit. Grandpa Joe's farm had been in our family for generations. When he died 2 months ago, I inherited it all, 180 acres I hadn't visited since we buried him. 6 hours later, I turned on to the familiar dirt road. The peaceful morning was shattered by the roar of machinery. Dust clouds rose above the trees where corn used to grow. I crested the hill and my heart stopped. A fleet of yellow excavators tore into the soil where Grandpa taught me to plant seeds. Workers in hard hats swarmed like ants, marking areas with bright orange spray paint. A massive sign dominated the roadside. "Future home of Oak Ridge Estates, 96 luxury homes starting at $725,000. I slammed on my brakes and jumped out, marching toward a woman standing apart from the chaos. She wore cream-colored pants and a pristine blue blazer despite the dust. Her hair was styled into a perfect helmet, not moving even in the breeze. "What the hell is happening here?" I demanded. She looked me up and down like I was garbage someone had left on her doorstep. "Site preparation. I'm Rebecca, Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association President. This is my land. My grandfather owned this farm. He died 2 months ago and left everything to me." Rebecca's smile never reached her eyes. "There must be some misunderstanding. Oak Ridge purchased this parcel last year. We have all necessary permits and approvals." "That's impossible. My grandfather would never sell this land." "Perhaps he didn't mention it to you. The sale was finalized 8 months ago." My head spun. Grandpa had been sick, but his mind stayed sharp until the end. He wouldn't have sold his beloved farm without telling me. Something wasn't right. "I want to see those documents," I said. Rebecca handed me a business card with manicured fingers. "Contact our legal department. Now, if you'll excuse me, we have homes to build." She turned away, already dismissing me from her mind. Back at the farmhouse, Ellen waited on the porch with tea and fury in her eyes. "They started showing up with measuring tools about 3 months ago," she explained. "Your grandfather was livid. He kept saying they were trying to steal what wasn't theirs." "Did he ever mention selling any land?" "Never. He swore this farm would stay in your family forever. The day before his final hospital visit, he was digging through his office like a madman. Said he needed to find something to protect what was yours." Grandpa's office remained exactly as he left it. Books and papers covered every surface. The smell of his pipe tobacco still hung in the air. I started opening drawers, searching for anything about land sales. Nothing. Hours passed. Night fell. My eyes burned from reading faded documents under the desk lamp. Just as I was about to give up, my foot hit something under the desk. A loose floorboard. It moved slightly when I stepped on it. I knelt down and pried it open with a letter opener. Inside was a metal box. The key hung from a nail on the underside of the desk. Inside, I found the original deed to the farm, Grandpa's will naming me as heir, and several yellowed surveys of the property. Most important was a letter addressed to me in his shaky handwriting. "If you're reading this," it began, "then they're trying to take what's ours. What's yours?" My hands trembled as I read. Grandpa explained that developers had been eyeing our land for years. They'd tried pressure, then threats, but he always refused. In his final months, someone from Oak Ridge visited repeatedly. The man claimed to need a simple signature for utility access, bringing different papers each time. "I never signed away our land," Grandpa wrote. "If they say I did, they're lying. Look at the original survey from 1902 and compare it to what's recorded at the county now. The truth is in the boundaries." I dug deeper in the box and found the original survey. It showed property lines that extended much further than I'd realized. According to this document, our farm was nearly 250 acres, not the 180 listed in current records. I stayed up all night, spreading papers across the kitchen table, comparing the old survey with newer maps. Something sinister had happened. The eastern boundary had shifted over decades, shrinking our land. It wasn't just the construction area. According to these original documents, we owned land where part of the existing Oak Ridge development already stood. By sunrise, I knew exactly what I needed to do. First, find a lawyer who couldn't be bought, then understand exactly what Rebecca and her rich friends were up to. If they thought they could steal from my family, they'd made the worst mistake of their lives. I folded Grandpa's letter and tucked it into my pocket. "I'll fix this," I promised the empty room. What Rebecca didn't realize was that she hadn't just messed with some absent grandson. She'd walked straight into a trap set by my grandfather from beyond the grave, and I was about to spring it. I didn't sleep that night. By 8 a.m., I waited outside the only property lawyer in town. James Franklin looked older than I expected, with thick glasses and a bow tie that belonged in another century. "So you believe Oak Ridge is building on land that belongs to you?" he asked after I explained my situation. I spread the documents across his desk. "These are the original surveys from 1902, updated in 1978. Compare them to the current county records." James studied both sets of papers, tracing boundary lines with his finger. His eyebrows climbed higher with each passing minute. "This is highly unusual," he finally said. "According to these originals, your property extends nearly half a mile further east than what's currently recorded. That would include not just the construction site, but also the existing Oak Ridge clubhouse and about 22 homes built 4 years ago." "Exactly," I nodded. James called the county assessor's office, putting the call on speaker. After navigating a maze of departments, we learned something shocking. In 1984, a minor adjustment to the eastern boundary was recorded, just a 12-foot easement for utilities. But in 1995, a much larger change appeared, reducing the property by nearly 70 acres. The documentation was sparse, just a form with a signature that barely resembled Grandpa's. "He was in the hospital that month," I said, checking the date. "Triple bypass surgery. He couldn't have signed this." James's expression turned grave. "That would constitute fraud, but proving it after all these years won't be easy. What can we do? File for an emergency injunction to halt construction immediately, then petition the court to recognize the original boundaries based on the historic surveys." While James prepared the emergency filing, I drove to the county records office. I needed more ammunition. Hours later, hidden in a back corner of the library with stacks of public records, I discovered gold. Oak Ridge wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a web of shell companies. The same 6 names appeared throughout: Rebecca, her husband Edward, County Commissioner Peter, Planning Board Director Mark, and 2 others. But the most interesting document was from just 3 months ago. A loan approval for $20 million to finance Oak Ridge East, with the land itself listed as collateral. My land. I took photos of everything with my phone and headed to the offices of the local newspaper. The editor, Sarah Williams, had known my grandfather. When I told her I was investigating potential fraud involving prominent local officials, her eyes lit up. "I can't publish accusations without evidence," she warned, "but I can look into the approval process for this development." It did move unusually fast. Back at the farmhouse, I found Ellen talking to another elderly neighbor. "That's Frank," she introduced us. "He used to own property that's now part of Oak Ridge." Frank's face darkened at the mention of Rebecca. "That woman is the reason I sold my place. The HOA fined me every week for unapproved landscaping. I'd been growing those tomatoes for 30 years. Then they said my workshop violated some rule they just made up. The fines kept coming until I couldn't afford to fight anymore." "How many others did this happen to?" I asked. At least 15 old-timers sold out in the last few years, always for less than market value, always to companies I later found out were connected to those Oak Ridge people. A pattern emerged. Find vulnerable landowners, harass them with fines and regulations, force them to sell cheap, develop the land, and make millions. My grandfather had been their latest target, but he'd been one step ahead. My phone rang. It was James. The judge granted our emergency injunction. Construction has to stop immediately until a hearing next week. But brace yourself, this is going to get ugly. I thanked him and drove back to the construction site with the court order in hand. The workers were packing up for the day when I arrived. Rebecca's black SUV still sat near the site office. She came out as I approached, phone to her ear as usual. When she saw me, her expression hardened. "Construction stops now," I said, handing her the court order. "Legal boundaries are in dispute." She scanned the document, her perfect composure cracking slightly. "This is ridiculous. We have every approval we need." Based on fraudulent boundaries, I have the original surveys. For the first time, uncertainty flashed in her eyes. It vanished quickly, replaced by cold fury. "This little stunt will cost you," she said quietly. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Actually, I do. 6 names on dozens of business filings. $20 million in loans using stolen land as collateral. County officials fast-tracking approvals for projects they secretly invest in. I hadn't planned to reveal how much I knew, but the look on her face was worth it. Rebecca's manicured hand tightened around her phone until her knuckles turned white. "You're making a serious mistake," she hissed. "We can be reasonable. Perhaps you'd consider a generous offer for the remaining farmland. 7 figures, immediate payment." "Not interested. Everyone has a price." Her smile returned, confident and predatory. "Think about it. You don't even live here. What do you care about some old dirt?" "This old dirt has been in my family for 4 generations. It's not for sale." I turned to leave, feeling her eyes burning into my back. As I reached my car, she called out, "Commissioner Peter is my husband's golf partner. Judge Evans comes to my dinner parties. You think your injunction will last? You're nobody in this town." I drove away, her words echoing in my mind. She was right about one thing. I was an outsider here now. But she'd overlooked something important. Grandpa hadn't been. He'd lived in this town his entire life, knew everyone, and was respected even by those who disagreed with him. And he'd left me more than just land. Back at the farmhouse, I returned to his office. If Grandpa had anticipated this fight, what else had he prepared? I searched more carefully, examining every folder, every notebook. In an album labeled Community Picnic 2018, I found dozens of photos of Grandpa with neighbors, local business owners, and families who'd known him forever. Each photo had names written on the back. These weren't just memories, they were connections. People who might stand with me against Oak Ridge. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Parking violation at your property, fine $500. Oak Ridge HOA compliance." Attached was a photo of my car parked at Grandpa's farm, my own property. This was how it started, the pattern Frank had described. Harassment by paperwork. But unlike the others, I knew their game now. And I had something they didn't expect. Grandpa's secret weapon still hidden in his files, waiting for the right moment. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, 5 white SUVs with Oak Ridge security painted on the doors blocked my driveway. A man in uniform handed me a thick envelope. "Cease and desist notice from Oak Ridge Homeowners Association. You're ordered to withdraw all claims against the development or face legal action." Inside was a letter claiming my documents were fake and that I was attempting fraud. They demanded I pay for damages to the community's reputation. I tried to leave for breakfast, but discovered they had placed large concrete blocks across the end of my driveway overnight. "Sorry, sir," one guard said without looking sorry at all. "This access point hasn't been approved by the development committee. It's been closed for safety reasons." I was trapped on my own property. My phone rang. Rebecca's name flashed on the screen. "Good morning," she said sweetly. "Enjoying the view?" "This is harassment. You can't block access to my property." Actually, according to county records, the real ones, that driveway crosses Oak Ridge common areas. We're within our rights to control access. "You know those records are wrong," she laughed. "Let me explain how this works. The county commissioner plays golf with my husband every Sunday. The building inspector's daughter works for my real estate company. The water department supervisor lives in Oak Ridge." My stomach dropped as she continued. "By tomorrow, your farmhouse will be cited for at least 15 code violations. Your water might get shut off due to maintenance issues. Local contractors won't return your calls because they know better than to cross me." "That's illegal," I said. "That's small-town politics," she replied. "You can't win this, but I'm reasonable. Drop your claims, sign over the disputed acres, and this all goes away. I'll even throw in a nice payment for your trouble. This isn't about money. It's always about money, dear. Think it over. You have until tomorrow." She hung up. True to Rebecca's word, by afternoon, a county inspector arrived. He found problems with everything: the wiring, the septic system, the porch railings. My water pressure dropped to a trickle. When I ordered pizza for dinner, the driver called to say he couldn't find my address, though delivery had never been a problem before. I was being cut off step by step. That night, I sat on the porch in darkness, watching the security lights sweeping across the fields where Grandpa had once grown corn. My phone lit up with a message from James. "They've filed a countersuit claiming your documents are forged. Court date set for 3 months from now. They'll keep building in the meantime." 3 months. By then, the houses would be half finished. As I considered my next move, headlights appeared on the long driveway. A car carefully maneuvered around the concrete barriers and approached the house. A man stepped out. Gary, the Oak Ridge treasurer who had examined my documents at the construction site. He glanced nervously at the security vehicles in the distance. "I shouldn't be here," he said. "If Rebecca finds out—" "Why are you here?" I asked. He pulled out a flash drive from his pocket. "Because what she's doing isn't right. I've been keeping the HOA books for 7 years. There are things you should see." Inside, he opened his laptop and showed me financial records, meeting minutes, and emails. "Rebecca and the board have been using HOA funds like their personal bank account," he explained. "Special fees that disappear, contracts that go to family members, reserve funds invested in their side businesses." "Why show me this?" I asked. "Because I'm not the only unhappy homeowner. Many of us are tired of her rules and her control. When you showed up with those property documents, it was the first time I've seen her scared." He pointed to a spreadsheet. "Look at these special assessments from last year. Every homeowner paid $3,000 for road repairs. The actual work cost half that amount. The rest vanished." "That's theft," I said. Gary nodded. "And there's more. The 20 homes you said are on your land? The people who live there have been complaining about drainage problems for years. Rebecca keeps promising fixes, but nothing happens. Now we know why. She knew those houses might not legally belong to the HOA." As we talked, my phone buzzed with texts from numbers I didn't recognize. "We support you against Rebecca. The Wilsons, 38 Oak Ridge Lane. She fined us $500 for planting vegetables instead of flowers. Our children's playground equipment was removed without notice. We want to join your fight. The Davis family." Gary smiled slightly. "I may have shared your number with a few friends." For the first time since this battle began, I felt hope. Rebecca had power, connections, and money, but she had also made enemies, many of them. "We need a plan," I said, "and I think I know where to start." 3 days later, I walked into the Oak Ridge Community Center. Nearly 100 people filled our rows of folding chairs. At the front, Rebecca stood in a red blazer pointing at pictures of big houses on a screen. "Just imagine the swimming pool with its waterfall feature," she said, smiling wide. "Our homes will be worth so much more once these new neighbors move in." People clapped, a few whistled. Nobody knew what I carried in my folder would ruin their party. I took a deep breath and walked straight down the center aisle. "Excuse me," I said loudly. "I need to speak about this development." Rebecca's smile dropped for a second, then returned faker than before. "We'll take questions after the presentation." "This can't wait." I stepped onto the small stage and faced the curious crowd. "My name is Jack Miller. My grandfather owned Pine Creek Farm for 60 years. "The old property we purchased," Rebecca cut in quickly. "Yes, we're very grateful to finally develop that eyesore." Murmurs rippled through the room. I opened my folder and pulled out the first document. "This is the original land survey from 1902, I said, holding it up. "And this is the updated survey from 1978. I placed copies in front of each board member seated behind the podium. "According to these legal documents, my grandfather's land extends 70 acres farther east than what appears in current county records. Put simply, you're building on land that legally belongs to me, and not just the new development. According to these boundaries, 22 existing homes and your clubhouse are sitting on my property too." The room exploded with voices. People stood up, someone knocked over a chair. "This is ridiculous," Rebecca shouted, grabbing one of the surveys. "We have permits, we've sold lots, construction has already started. Your permits are based on incorrect property lines. I filed papers with the court to stop all building immediately." Gary, the treasurer, studied the documents with growing panic. "Rebecca," he whispered loudly enough for the microphone to catch, "these boundary markers match the old creek bed. They look real." She yanked the papers from his hands. "This is clearly some kind of trick to get money from us. We'll fight this nonsense." "You're welcome to try," I replied, pulling out one final document. "But here's something you should know. According to these legal boundaries, your personal house, Rebecca, sits entirely on what is legally my land." The room went completely quiet. People looked at each other, suddenly understanding what this meant. 22 families might not actually own the ground under their homes. A man in the back stood up. "Are you saying we might lose our houses?" Before I could answer, Rebecca slammed her hand on the podium. "This meeting is over. Everyone out. The board needs to discuss this privately." As people shuffled out, whispering nervously, a young woman touched my arm. "I'm Lisa. I just put my life savings into a lot in the new section. What happens to me?" "I'm not trying to hurt regular people," I told her honestly. "This is about fixing a wrong." "Don't listen to a word he says," Rebecca hissed, suddenly beside us. After everyone else left, she leaned close to my face. "You have no idea who you're messing with. I built Oak Ridge from nothing. Nobody takes it from me." 6 months later, I sat on Grandpa's porch watching children ride bikes past houses with doors painted every color of the rainbow. Behind me, his farmhouse had been transformed into our community center. The court had ruled in our favor after Rebecca was arrested for fraud. The original property lines were restored. Homeowners received proper deeds to their land. The new development was redesigned to protect the wetlands that Grandpa had cherished. Ellen joined me on the porch, handing me lemonade. "Your grandfather would be bursting with pride," she said, pointing to where construction had finally resumed on the redesigned development. Smaller homes, more green space, solar panels on every roof. "I found something while cleaning out his study," I told her, pulling out a faded notebook. Grandpa's journal from 20 years ago. He had fought developers back then, too, when they first tried to build on the wetlands. Ellen smiled. "He always said you were just like him, stubborn as a mule when fighting for what's right." In the distance, a blue heron rose from the protected marsh, soaring above homes where people now lived in harmony with the land. Sometimes the best trap isn't about catching someone doing wrong. It's about showing them a better way to do right. Rebecca tried to steal my land, but instead gave me something far more valuable, a community worth fighting for. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to hit subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Have you ever had to stand up against someone who abused their power? Share your experience in the comments below.